Okay, hello everybody. It's just clicked over to 12 noon, so we're going to get started. My name is Cara Bevington. I manage the Australian Museum Eureka Prizes, and this is Kate Smith, who's the program coordinator. I'd like to start today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the country on which Kate and I are joining from, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the first scientists, makers, and innovators of the land, waterways, and skies. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present and extend those respects to any First Nations people joining us today. Now, Kate and I are joining from the museum, and it's a really busy Friday. In here, there are so many school groups. There's actually quite a lot of background noise. So if anyone's having any trouble hearing us at any point, please pop a little message into the chat box, and we'll do our best to kind of try and sort out our audio. We weren't expecting it to be so busy in here today. So welcome to everyone who's joined today's session. We had people register from different universities and research institutes from all over Australia. So thank you for making the time to be with us. And I'm really excited to spend the next 45 minutes with you all. I hope that you leave the session with a deeper understanding of the Eureka Prizes and greater confidence in putting forward a really strong submission this year. So this session is being recorded and it will be made available on the Australian Museum's YouTube channel, just in case you miss anything or you'd like to share it with any other colleagues. So what are we going to run through today? So Kate and I are going to speak for about 30 minutes. I'm going to share some backgrounds about the Eureka Prizes, going to share some key dates, and then Kate is going to kind of go through all the juicy stuff, or the top tips about putting together your application. And then we're going to make sure we leave 15 minutes at the very end for any questions that you guys have. So speaking of questions, we invite you to use the chat feature to pop in your questions. Don't feel like you need to wait to the end. As we're speaking, pop in any questions that come into your mind. And then what we can do is kind of read through them while we're doing the session and make sure we get through as many as possible at the end. Kate's going to pop in a quick message into the chat feature now, just so you kind of know, where to add it and making sure you're putting your questions in all the right place. So first, just a little bit about the Eureka Prizes. I'm kind of going to go through some key program details. So the Eureka Prizes were created back in 1990. Initially, there was just 3 prizes. And today, 34 years later, we have 18 different prizes on offer this year. And the prizes seek to recognise the achievements of scientists, researchers, and science communicators at all career stages. There are prizes available for both individuals and teams, and entrants can either enter themselves or be nominated. The prizes are open, but not limited to those who work in research institutes, in universities, government departments, people who are science communicators, people working in the private sector and beyond. It's free to enter. There's no entry fee that you need to pay. And there's a prize pool of $180,000 this year to be shared amongst the winners. So let's take a quick look at the prize program. Oops. There we go. So this year there are 18 different prizes, as I mentioned, on offer across 4 categories. The categories are research and innovation, leadership, science engagement, and school science. So I won't read through all the prizes one by one, but up on the screen now you can see the research and innovation prizes. And now I've tabbed through to the 3 leadership prizes we have on offer this year and the 4 science engagement prizes. As mentioned, we also do have a prize for school students. We're not going to go into that today, but if you know some school students who might be interested, head to our website to learn more. So what I just quickly want to run through is kind of the timeline that people might sort of go through on their Eureka Prizes journey in 2024. So first of all, what we'd expect you to be doing if you are planning to enter right at the moment is be reviewing the prize information and figuring out which prize it is that you may be eligible to enter. And then you have until Friday, the 12th of April at 7 p.m. to kind of prepare all your entry materials and then submit your entry online. Now, we are incredibly strict about closing the entry system right on 7 p.m. And we do not accept late entries under any circumstances. So make sure, ideally, that you're submitting ahead of 6:59 p.m. Once entries are closed, all entries are screened for eligibility checks, and then all eligible entries are handed over to our incredible judges to review all of the entries. So each prize has a unique standalone judging panel of 4 to 5 really qualified individuals who are absolute experts and leaders in their fields. And judges are bound by a code of conduct and conflict of interest policy during their judging period with us. The judging happens in 2 stages, from late April until the end of May, and it results in the panel selecting 3 finalists, including 1 winner. We would then be in touch with all finalists around mid-June to let them know of their status, and they have to keep that news under wraps until we publicly announce all finalists on Wednesday, the 31st of July. And then hiding down here is the very last thing that will happen is we'll announce all the winners at an awards ceremony on Wednesday, the 4th of September. So that's a bit of background about the prizes and some kind of like big picture timelines. And I'm now going to hand over to Kate, who's kind of going to go through the tips about preparing your entry. So, whoops, onto the next screen. Here we go.
Thanks, Cara, and hi everyone. So first up, I'm just going to talk you through the prize information. It's a really sensible place to start. It's certainly where you should start too. So hopefully you've already taken a few moments to take a look at the information of any of the prizes that you might be interested in. If not, maybe jump onto our website now and follow along. But essentially what you'll see first up is a prize purpose. So you should really, I guess, consider that as a lens through which you look at all of the other prize information, and it's really the context in which judges will be assessing your work too. Next up, you'll see the assessment criteria. You'll probably notice that we've kept that really, really broad. We're really not looking for very specific types of entries. So that broad approach is very, very deliberate. And you'll see they're weighted as well. So make sure you pay attention to the weightings when you're preparing your responses to the criteria. You'll also see some prize-specific conditions of entry and category-specific conditions of entry. So really, you've got to be looking through that before you even consider starting an entry. And finally, you'll see at the bottom a list of the entry materials that you're required to submit as part of your entry. So you really need to be going over this information with a fine-tooth comb before you start your entry. And you also really need to be referring to it as you're working through that application. I guess this information really, it helps you determine whether you're eligible and also what you need to do, what you need to prepare and submit for the judges. This information does vary from prize to prize. A lot of the wording can look a little bit similar, but just do make sure you're going through it really, really carefully. The information is different prize on prize. And I'd also just like to take a moment to call out for those of you who are returning entrants, that's fantastic, great to see you back. We have updated some of the conditions of entry since last year, as well as some of the criteria. So really make sure you are giving those special attention as you're preparing your entry. Cara mentioned screening entries is the first step after submissions close. So what we're really doing here is ensuring that you meet the conditions of entry. We're making sure that the right materials have been submitted, that you've adhered to page limits, etc. And really, I guess that's what forms the screening process. So if you're going through those conditions of entry first, you'll be, I guess, ensuring that it's worth moving on to the assessment criteria and proceeding with your entry. And it's also important to note how well you respond to the assessment criteria. That's not something that Cara and I can counsel you on. That's really over to the judges. What we can help you work through are those conditions of entry and your eligibility. So before you start preparing your materials, make sure you're looking at those conditions of entry. Now we're going to move on to some tips for preparing a strong application. So just to offer some context here, Cara and I see all of the applications, we respond to all of the queries, we observe the judging process. So this is a really genuine list of what we see come up time and time again. So hopefully this gives you a little bit of a steer and sets you on the right path. So there are probably 5 key things that we really feel you should be paying attention to. And the first one is just getting clear on all the requirements. We spoke to those in the previous slide. What this means is just familiarising yourself with the prize information and also the online entry system as well. Make sure you don't leave it until the last minute to get in there and have a look around. There's lots of information. It's all important. You really just want to make sure you're not missing anything. If you're getting started early, that also gives you plenty of time to get in touch with us for questions. And, you know, some queries are a bit complex. Some take us a little bit of time to work through. So just make sure you're still giving yourself plenty of time to get into those and get in touch if you have any queries. Just a few things on the online entry system, which we'll look at in a bit more detail later. You're going to need contact details for everyone you're listing on the online entry form. So phone numbers, email addresses, job titles and whatnot. So make sure you take the time to collect those. You'll also need to combine your assessor reports into one document. That really just makes it easier for judges. And you'll also need to adhere to some file specifications. We've listed those really clearly in the online entry system. So just make sure you're taking time to look over those. You won't be able to submit an entry that doesn't complete all of the requirements. The form is validated, so that's just something to be aware of. As Cara said, we can't accept late submissions, so don't make a little admin detail the reason you can't submit your form. It's going to be really frustrating for you, and we just won't be able to accept information after the entry system closes and that deadline passes. So second point up here is consider your writing style and allow time for review as well. So how you write your application, it does really make a difference. Judges read a lot of entry materials, so just make it as easy as possible for them. They're going to appreciate it. It's worth noting that they're experts in their field, but they're not necessarily going to have your level of expertise. So you really need to be writing for a very well-educated audience, but also a non-specialist audience. So I think that's a really important note to keep in mind. Don't assume that they're going to know what you mean every single time without an explanation. So what that looks like, you know, don't use specialized jargon, don't use specialized terms. I was just looking through some entry materials the other day, and a judge had actually written a comment, impossible for a non-expert to understand. You know, that comment they're going to take back to the judging panel. If they don't understand your work, they're not going to be able to advocate for you. So you really just want to avoid a situation where they can't follow your work. So keep it simple, as I said, an educated audience, but just don't assume really, really high levels of expertise in your field. Another thing I want to mention here is, it sounds really obvious, but do present your response to the assessment criteria under individual headings. Judges don't want to be ploughing through sort of a long form essay trying to distill your responses. That's really going to frustrate them. So just be clear and concise, use headings and make your documents really readable. It's great to use figures and diagrams. You know, I think that can really boost an entry sometimes. You just need to do that within the page limits. And another point I'd call out under this, I guess, topic is that, you know, your science really needs to come first, but think about how you can craft a bit of a narrative, you know, take the judges on a journey to discover your work and your achievements. It's not a writing competition, but just think about how you can leverage storytelling techniques just to give your entry that little bit of a boost, help it stand out amongst the others. And finally, on this second point, get your work reviewed by someone else. You know, it's always amazing if you put your work aside and come back a week later, what you've missed, typing errors, little inconsistencies. So it really is worth building some proofing into your timeline as well. Okay, our third piece of advice up here is respond to the assessment criteria, which sounds really, really obvious, but it's actually more common than you might think for judges to actually note that an entry hasn't responded to the assessment criteria. And that's not to say that they might not think your work is of a really excellent standard. It's rarely the case. But I guess the assessment criteria is the benchmark. That's what judges are going to be assessing against, nothing else. So you need to make sure you are actually responding to that. And I think where this usually happens is, you're taking materials from other applications, other submissions, which can make a lot of sense. And, we certainly encourage you to do that, but just to make sure it's tailored to the prize that you're entering. I guess that really, it shows that you understand what is being asked for you, and it's really the only way that you can show your work, aligns with that assessment criteria. The fourth point up here is provide evidence to support your claims. And really, this is one of the most common things we see that lets an entry down. It comes up every year in most panels. It's really difficult for an entry to shine if there's not concrete evidence in there. It's not enough to talk about your impact and the work you're doing if you're speaking in really, really general terms. So make sure you've got really specific examples. You don't need to go into elaborate detail, but just demonstrate what you're doing. And finally, communicate timelines clearly. Now, most prizes have a timeline associated with them, and you need to show that your entered activity took place within those timeframes. It varies from prize to prize. It's generally between 1 and 7 years. So just make sure you're aware of that as you're working through the prize information. The best way you can illustrate this is really, really simple. Alongside key activities, key outcomes, and milestones, just put the date in bold, the year and the month is sufficient. Just scatter those throughout your document. We're going to feel a lot more confident that you align with the eligibility criteria, and judges will too. I think it's worth acknowledging here that, research, it can be the product of decades-long work, and that's absolutely fine. It's fine to offer context. You're probably going to need to do that to explain the work you're entering. But judges are instructed not to focus on those achievements and just focus on the timeframes per the conditions of entry. So just don't spend too much time on that context, because it's not going to be formally considered. It's worth noting as well, if you're entering the Eureka Prize for Outstanding ECR or the Emerging Leader in Science Prize and have experienced a career disruption, you'll be asked to provide timelines there as well. So just be methodical and clear. So we're really, really clear on the interruption and how to consider it effectively. If you have any questions about how you can illustrate that clearly, just reach out and we can send you a template. It's also worth noting, before I move on to the next slide, is that we've got quite a lot of blog content on the Australian Museum webpage. There are a lot of tips and tricks there as well. So if you found any of these helpful, there are a lot more over there. So do take the time to just jump on there and have a look. Okay, so on to assessors. We get a lot of questions about assessors. For most prizes, you'll be asked to submit 3 assessor reports or a combination of assessor reports and testimonials. They play a really key role in the judging process, so it's really important that you get those right. So we'll just take a look at some key points here that I hope are going to help you on your way there. I'll focus on assessor reports, but most of these points are going to be true for testimonials as well. And it'll be really clear in the prize information if testimonials are relevant to you and the prize you're entering. Top 5 tips for assessor reports. The first one is select a broad mix of individuals. So one of the most common mistakes is just not approaching a really well-curated mix of people. I think the key here is to offer judges a rounded set of unbiased perspectives. And you know what that looks like in practice. It's really going to vary between prizes and between entries, but at the very least, I really recommend reaching out beyond your organisation. So, you know, if there's one person that you work with, it's fine to approach them if you think they're really well placed, but I'd really recommend that you avoid probably approaching 3 colleagues and just go broader than your institution. So that really takes me to my next point, which is don't just select the most accessible people. I think the easiest people for you to access aren't necessarily going to be the best place to endorse your work. You know, taking this approach, it really just means you're not getting that broad mix of individuals that we spoke about. You know, and I think approaching someone, it can be a really daunting prospect, especially someone that you look up to, or, you know, someone who's a leader in their field. But I think if you do reach out to someone you really admire, you know, it can be a really nice experience, especially when you hear what they've got to say. And there's no doubt that that's really going to give your entry a boost as well. Okay, the third point up here touches on an earlier point really, and that's to refer to the assessment criteria. Just remember that all of those materials you submit, they're all there to help show that your work aligns with the assessment criteria, or roads lead back to that criteria. Each assessor, they're asked to respond to the criteria as well. So you really need to think about who's going to be well placed to do that. Think about how they might be able to fill in gaps in your own responses to the assessment criteria, and really give some thought to how your assessors might be able to complement one another as well. You know, if you're less confident talking about one particular criteria, maybe think about how an assessor can boost you up there. And I think a really good example here might be the leadership prizes. You know, sometimes you might feel like you're giving yourself a little bit of a character reference when it comes to some of those less tangible criteria. So that's a really good opportunity to get someone else to speak about those and reflect on, you know, how you meet those criteria. The fourth point up here, assessors shouldn't be personally or directly involved in the activity entered. We get so many questions about this. Essentially, you just need to be confident that they can offer an unbiased perspective, and that they wouldn't enjoy any direct benefit if you were to go on and win. You know, every research scenario is different. There's not a firm test, but one thing I would point out here is that you're not going to be deemed ineligible just on account of an assessor being perceived as too close to your work. That's just, it's not something we're looking for. Assessors are asked to explain their relationship to you when they're completing their report. So just think about how judges might perceive this. You know, if you know there's any chance that they might look at that and think, oh, you know, they're just a little bit too close and familiar, it's probably best to move on. As I say, there's no firm test, but just think about the optics of who you're selecting would be my best advice here. And I guess as well, just before we move on, I just want to note that nominators, they can also be selected as assessors. That's completely fine if that's something you're thinking about too. Okay, so final point on this slide is just to really brief your assessors, you know, set them up for success, give them the right information. It can really make a difference to the strength of their report. Make sure they've got the template, make sure they're clear on how to use it. Make sure they've got the prize information as well. Just familiarise them with the assessment criteria and that prize purpose we spoke about at the top. Remember, that's a lens. And then they can just, you know, really ensure that they're aligning with that prize information as well. Be really clear about deadlines. We've had a few really unfortunate situations where an assessor hasn't provided a report in time for it to be uploaded to the online entry system. Unfortunately, we can't accept those separately after the deadlines close. So just make sure that they're coming to you with plenty of time to get them uploaded before that deadline. Okay, so moving on, one last slide from me, and then I'm going to hand you back to Cara, who I know has been answering some questions in the chat over there. So these are really, they're not tips per se, they're just other considerations that I really encourage you to keep in mind when you're preparing your entry. And the first one, this is so important. I mentioned it before. Judges, they're not looking for a particular type of entry. You know, it can be really, really tempting to look at who's won in the past. Every year we see a spike in our archive pages when entries open. You know, people obviously looking at who's won in the past. It's really easy to get caught in that comparison trap. But just remember, judges are assessing against the criteria. They're not assessing against past winners. So by all means, take a look, but try not to get too caught up on that. My second point here is to think really carefully about who you list as an entrant. Think about, you know, where the credit's due. All listed entrants, they get screened as part of the initial eligibility checks. And once entries go to judges, you know, we can't add anyone else. All those checks have taken place, so you won't be able to add or remove anyone. You know, I'd say probably every year we have at least one finalist who realizes a little bit too late that they probably should have added someone else on the entry form. And sadly, we just can't help you out there. It's a really unfortunate situation. It can be a bit awkward in a team setting. You know, if you're a finalist, you're probably going to end up with your name in the public domain. You know, there's going to be a lot of campaign work. There's an award ceremony. So just make sure you're giving really careful thought to who should be on that form from the outset. Okay, my third point, don't make assumptions about eligibility. You know your work better than anyone else. If you're unsure whether your work's eligible, just reach out. You know, I've shared this example before, but a few years ago, we had someone who was really doubting whether they were eligible. They reached out, we talked through their circumstances, and they went on to win. Obviously, it was, you know, so important that they'd reached out and made that query. Otherwise, they just might not have even entered. So if you're in doubt, certainly reach out and we can talk through your circumstances. You know, we want you to enter. We're here to help you. So if in doubt, just reach out. And I guess that takes me to my final point. You know, just contact us with any questions. Each entry form, it has a form at the bottom of the page. It's really easy to get in touch about any of the prizes. We've got an email address as well, which will pop on the deck at the end of this session. So reach out, as I say, you know, we want you to enter. We'd love to hear from you, and we're really keen to help you work out how to make that possible. So that's it from me. I'm going to hand you back to Cara, and she's going to talk you through the online entry system.
Hi again, everybody. And thanks everyone who's been popping questions into the chat. We set the settings to private, so only we can see your questions, just in case people did want to ask questions they felt was sort of personal to them, they weren't sure that other people should see. So I probably should have said that at the beginning. So any questions you send through will just only be seen by Kate and I. I've been doing my best trying to answer questions while Kate's been speaking. Any that are kind of need a bit more of a detailed reply, we'll email you after this meeting and contact you directly, because some just need a bit more of a thoughtful response. But please keep them coming through. It's great hearing what you want to know. So I'm now just going to kind of lift the hood, so to speak, on the online entry system, because all entries must be submitted online. We don't accept sort of paper entries or things like that. So I just want to show you that this is what the kind of landing page of the online entry system looks like. And it's currently live and we're accepting entries. So I encourage you, even if you're just thinking about entering, to pop onto the online entry system, set yourself up with an account and just have a little poke around so that you are familiar with it. And there's no surprises kind of further down the track. So now I will just, oops, my mouse is being a bit funny. Here we go. So once you've logged in and you've got yourself a profile in the system, this is the page you'll get taken to, and it's got some key dates on it. And the first step you need to do is kind of select this orange start entry button, which is down the bottom. What you will then do is select the category you want to enter and the prize you want to enter. So in this example, you can see now I've selected the research and innovation category, and I've selected the sustainability research prize. The system is quite intuitive, and it will walk you through the information and the documents you need to provide. You can kind of see those little grey tabs along the top. And once you've completed everything in this details page and then click save, which is down the bottom, it'll then auto save anything you pop into the system as you're moving forward. So you can absolutely start your entry, have a poke around, and then come back to it a few days, a week, or whatever later to complete it. You don't need to kind of sit down and do it in one session. And then incomplete entries just can't be submitted. What will happen is you'll get a little error message and it'll tell you the bits that are missing. So that can be really, really helpful, and also why we encourage people to start their entry ahead of time, so that they can be submitting, aiming to submit things and then getting that little error message if they have done something wrong. Once you've successfully submitted your entry, you'll get a confirmation email. And if at any point throughout your journey, if you're having any issues with the online system, please just reach out to Kate and I straight away, Eureka at Australian.museum, and we will assist you. It can be really helpful if you share a screen grab of whatever issue you're encountering, just so we can kind of try and sort it out for you as quickly as possible. Okay, we're going to wrap up really soon and get to your other questions, but I just want to quickly offer some thoughts. If you're sort of thinking about entering, but you're thinking, gosh, this is going to be a big project to pull together my whole application. Just want to share some kind of reflections on why you might even think about entering the Eureka Prizes. So the entry sort of process can offer a really valuable reflection and learning exercise. We often hear from people, they're so kind of heads down, doing the work, that they don't often take a moment to kind of pause, step back and collect evidence and really quantify what they have achieved over the previous years. Secondly, the documents that you create for your Eureka Prizes submission, they're all yours. You can use them for other opportunities. So you could repurpose them to perhaps apply for grants, repurpose them for your annual reports, or even entering other prize programs. They don't have to have a one-time use. You can kind of think about them having multiple uses. So the hours that go into it can kind of serve you into the future as well. Thirdly, sort of requesting assessor reports or testimonials gives you a really nice opportunity to reach out to people in your networks, to connect with them and seek some feedback on how you or how the project that you're running is going. And then, the last kind of points are around it. If you are selected as a finalist or winner, then you'd get to sort of the benefit of being part of a national publicity campaign where even more people would get to learn about the great work that you're doing. And you get that sort of external validation that comes from being recognised publicly in this way that a lot of people can find really encouraging. So that's sort of got us to the end of the formal part of the presentation. I'm just quickly going to run through those key dates again because they're super important. So entries are currently open. They will close 7 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time on Friday, the 12th of April, not a minute later. Our simple kind of website URL, we can get everything you need to know about entering, is australian.museum/Eureka, and you can access the online entry system through that webpage, or I've also popped up the direct link to the online entry system there as well. If you need any support in your journey, and honestly, there are no silly questions and no questions too small or too big, please email us, and email us as early as possible because we're getting a lot of contact at the moment and we want to make sure we come back to you with enough time for you to be able to act on any questions that you have. So I'm going to hand over to Kate now, who's been busy in the chat box reading all your questions and trying to respond to what she can, and just kind of go through a few of the FAQs we're getting through the chat box.
Thanks, Cara. So a few here, so bear with us. One we've received is, can I resubmit an unsuccessful application from last year? Absolutely. We just, you need to make sure that you're reviewing those conditions of entry and also the assessment criteria. Just back to the earlier point I made, please don't copy and paste. Some of the information has changed, so just make sure you're really familiar with this year's information. Then by all means, we do really encourage you to resubmit. some of my research was carried out overseas. Can I still enter it? So this program is about rewarding Australian science. That's why it exists. So the activity that you're entering, it must have taken place or been led from Australia. You know, we recognise that research, it's a bit of a global game. We acknowledge that some research, I guess, does extend beyond Australian borders. But I guess, yeah, back to just eligibility, make sure you're reviewing those conditions of entry really carefully, and also just consider the intention of this program. It's all about Australian science. Why have the eligibility requirements for the Eureka Prize for Outstanding ECR changed? So just some context there. Previously, we accepted entries from researchers who were under 35 years old or up to 5 years post-PhD. You know, people start their research careers at really different stages. So our previous approach, that created a bit of an uneven playing field. You know, your PhD conferral date, that's just a standardized access point. So we've really just aligned ourselves with what other programs are doing out there. So that's the reason for this change. And it's worth noting as well that that also applies to the the Eureka Prize for emerging research. The timeframes are a little different, but that change has been applied to that prize as well. Will the recording be available? Yes, we will be sending out an EDM to everyone after this session. So we'll create a link to some of those blog posts and resources we spoke about, and the online session as well. But just for information, it will be back on the page you've registered on as well. So that's where you can find it. Got a question about the innovative use of technology. Last year, the guidelines specified that both the associated publication and the activities needed to be published within or completed within 3 years. This year, the guidelines specify that only the activities need to be within the previous 3 years. Does that mean the publication can be more than 3 years old? I think this will make a lot more sense to everyone out there once you're reading the prize information. But essentially, the publication can be older than 3 years. It really still needs to align with the entered work, though. That time frame, as I mentioned earlier, will be different for every prize. So just look over the information. But yes, the publication can be a little bit older than that time frame that's specified in the prize information. Got any more questions? Can an applicant be part of 2 different applications, not as a leader, but as part of the team, i.e. participate in 2 different citizen science projects which are willing to apply? That's a great question. So just stepping back for a moment, our terms and conditions state that you can't enter the same work twice in the 1 year, but different applicants and different work absolutely eligible to enter different prizes and the same prize as well if you're involved in multiple citizen science projects, as long as that work is very clearly and distinctly different and those 2 projects aren't related in any way. That's fine. Just reach out to us if you want to discuss that any more before you proceed with your application. I think that is taking us to the end of the questions. So I am going to hand you back to Cara now.
Great. Okay, yeah, thanks everyone for making the time to join the session and to ask your questions. I think we've already said this so many times, but if other questions occur to you, just reach out. We are here to help. And as Kate said, we'll be sharing this session, the recording of it, with everyone who's signed up to attend this. So feel free to also pass it on to any colleagues you might be collaborating with, or anyone else you might think would benefit from learning these tips. When we send out the recording, I'll also have a super brief survey just to get your feedback on, was the content and kind of the timing and pacing of this session useful for you? We'd really love to hear your feedback, you know, because I'm talking to a bit of a vacuum. And I guess lastly, the most important thing is to say is just best of luck as you sort of think about your submission and start preparing it. And thanks for kind of being part of our journey to celebrate excellence in Australian science. So we will leave it there and look forward to being in touch with many of you via email in the coming weeks. Okay, thanks again. Bye.